Hi everyone, Ainsley here from Small Fry Creations, and this week I'm going to show you how you can make this round side table with a new material that I've never used before. Let me show you how I did it. Today is a day of firsts. I'm trying out new camera settings to try and get better lighting consistency throughout the video, and we're going to try out a new material. Plywood, yes, but plywood that bends. So I want to try and make something out of it. The simplest thing I can come up with is a cylinder style side table, so that's what we're going to tackle today. I've already got a circle cut out which is from a previous project, which is scrap, which we're going to use. I'm going to cut out an identical circle using plywood, and then I'm going to see if I can bend the plywood around and go from there. I'm going to level with you. I tried to sketch this up in SketchUp, could not get it to work because my SketchUp skills are not that great. So I've got it all in my head, which sometimes fails, but we're going to give it a go. The fact that you're watching this tells me that it worked. So I say let's go and get some circles cut.
My first step was to cut an identical circle to the circle I had. I used my circle cutting jig, which is a copy of the one April Wilkinson made for her router, which I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to make one for yourself. The radius of my circle is 345mm. The circle I had on hand was made from hardwood, which was perfect for the bottom of the table, and the top I cut from plywood. The top of the cylinder can be made from anything as it won't be seen. It just needs to be at least 18mm thick so you have good meat to attach the plywood to. I needed a way to connect my two circles together, so I just used some 2x4s and cut some 35mm stock. My 2x4s were cut to length at 445mm. Once I attached the top, this will give me a finish height of around about 520mm. I glued and nailed my 2x4s into place, getting them as close to the edge as I could. I cut the bending plywood to width, which for me was 481mm, once I included the thickness of the top and the bottom circle. The tricky part for me was working out the length to cut the plywood to. There is probably some magic way to work this measurement out, but for me, I got a piece of string and measured around my circle and then applied this to my plywood. Now I love working with new material, but boy, this bending plywood gave me a run for my money. This was the most stressful part of the build. I applied glue to the top and bottom circle and also the post. I started the plywood in the middle of one of the posts, and this allows me to nail the plywood to the top and bottom, but also down at the start and finish of the plywood. I started with a nail gun, but because the plywood is only 4mm thick, the nail gun just shot nails straight through it. So I headed to the hardware store and I picked up some nails with a flat head. I would use clamps to clamp the plywood into place and then hammer the nails, working my way around. I used a flush trim saw to flush up the top and bottom and sanded everything flush. Now in solving one problem, I was creating another. I now needed a way to cover up the nails, so I decided to add a pattern to the base. I cut 20mm strips from the bending plywood and used these to create the pattern on the bottom. This added to the design but also covered up the nails. I started by wrapping and gluing a piece around the top and the bottom of the base.
I've got the last of the edge banding drying and I've basically sanded this. I'm going to add some pattern onto the bottom of this, but I've just got to wait for it to dry. So while we do that, I'm going to move on to the top. I've got some of this old tabletop here which I'm going to cut up, put through the thicknesser, completely redo, and then I'm going to use this for the top and make it into a pattern top. So first off we'll start at the table saw and then we'll get to the thicknesser.
I do apologise for this project jumping around, but I just want to keep things in order in which I did them in the workshop. You can make the top whatever design you like and also out of any material. I just had some sections of old tabletop that I wanted to use, so I went with this. When you're using recycled wood, you want to take a minute to make sure there's no metal in the wood. The last thing you need is to set the break off on the saw. This table had some metal screws that we used to connect the pieces together. I used a chisel and a hammer to get these out. Now yes, I did destroy some of the wood in getting out the metal, but I knew I wasn't cutting all the way to the edge. The main reason for taking the metal out was because I didn't know how deep the metal went and I just wanted to be safe. I started by cutting 30mm strips out of the wood. Once I had all the strips cut, I could run them through the thicknesser and see what wood I had to work with. For me, this is always a fun part of the project, to reveal what's under the stain or paint. It looked like oak to me, which was perfect for this project. I had very limited material, so I had to really take my time to measure everything out and work out exactly what I needed. I managed to make a sketch in SketchUp that was in no way perfect, but it gave me the measurements I needed. I cut 8 pieces at the same length of each measurement. I also drew a line at 45 degrees, which helped with the glue up to have the least amount of material wastage. My first glue up was the 8 sections. While the 8 sections were in glue up, I jumped back to the base and started to glue on the vertical strips. Now the challenge here was to get the spacing right. I had to work with what I knew. I knew the length of the plywood because I'd already cut it. I headed back to SketchUp and I drew a rectangle at this measurement and worked out the spacing. For me, it was 64mm. I cut a spacer to this measurement to help with the glue up. I also taped everything into place without glue first to make sure it was right. I then came back and glued everything into place. While the base was drying, I could jump back to the top.
I just want to jump in here real quick as I'm in the middle of putting this video together and have realised that I have completely lost all of the footage of me cutting my 45-degree angles on all of the pieces that make up the top to bring this together. So I just want to run you through how I did it. So I had a scrap piece of plywood with a scrap piece of hardwood. I screwed the hardwood on at a 45-degree angle, and then what I could do was take each of the pieces, butt them up against the 45-degree angle and run them through the table saw nice and safely. So that's how I brought the tabletop together. I just wanted to run you through it so that it wasn't confusing as you were going through the video.
With the top all glued up, I would wood putty to fill any gaps on the top, and I could also remove the tape from the base to start to give everything a good sand. At this stage, I started with 80 grit and made my way up to 180 grit. I could also give the base undercoat and 2 coats of white paint.
Got my tabletop lightly sanded and we're now up to the point where we can cut our circle. I'm going to go ahead and aim for approximately our 480mm across because I think that's what I can make out of my tabletop. If I can make it bigger, great. If it needs to be smaller, that's fine too. I've accounted for it in the side table. So I'll finish getting this attached and then we'll go and cut the circle.
The tabletop ended up measuring 450mm across. I used a straight bit in the router and made the cut in 4 or 5 passes. I decided to add a chamfer to the underside of the table and a roundover to the top side. The chamfer takes away from the thickness and the roundover makes it nice to touch and use. With the top now all cut and shaped, I could finish the sanding up to 220 grit. At this stage, I also sprayed the top with water and let it dry. This will raise the grain and then I can sand it again at 220 grit. Now when I cut the circle, I had a hole in the middle because of the jig. I also had a hole in the top circle of the base, so to glue the top to the bottom, I used a nail to line up the 2 holes, and this gave me even spacing around the table. Now I understand wood movement may cause some issues, but this is a test and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I then puttied up the hole on top and I could call this table done. I am super happy with how this came out, and it's a great feeling to have a picture in my mind and bring it to life. I hope you have liked this video, and if you have, help me out by hitting those subscribe and like buttons, and I'll see you on the next one.